The prisoner and the experiment, the metal walls were cold the lights were. Too bright, everything smelled like chemicals, and fear Captain Elias Ward sat alone in a clear glass cell. He didn't move, he didn't speak, his eyes were calm but sharp, like they could see through everything around him. Alien. Scientists stared. They were Zarnak's tall, silver-skinned creatures with no mouths. Just long black eyes and thick armor on their chests. They moved like machines. No emotion, no kindness. Elias was their prisoner, the only living human they had ever captured. For weeks they had poked him, scanned him, and taken samples from his body. They didn't ask questions, they didn't talk, they just observed like he was some strange animal in a zoo. Today was different. The door to the lab opened. With a heavy his high Commander Krill entered. He was larger than the rest. His armor was black with glowing blue lines running down his arms. He carried authority like a weapon when he walked, and the other aliens stepped back. He is ready, one of the scientists said through a machine translator. Begin the extraction. Skrell walked up to Elias's cell. He looked at the human. For a long time Elias stood up slowly and walked to the edge of the glass. They were face to face, only a few inches between them. Skrill tilted his head, studying him. You are not afraid. Elias's voice was quiet but firm. You don't know what you're doing. We are. Zarn. Skrill replied. We always know what we're doing. He turned to the scientist Pros. A long arm came down from the ceiling. At the end of it was a silver device shaped like a claw. It buzzed as it activated the scanner wheel. Read his internal energy, one scientist said. We will find what makes humans different, what give them strength. Elias took one deep breath, then he smiled. I told you. He said, you don't want to do this. The machine locked. Onto his chest a beam of light shot into his body. At first nothing happened. The screen on the alien monitor blinked, then something changed. The lab's temperature began to rise. The glass of the cell began to fog. Skrell stepped back. Frowning, what is this? Suddenly he dropped to his knees. His body shook. His eyes burned bright gold. He grabbed his chest and screamed, not like an alien, not with machine's coldness, but with raw, wild pain. Human, what have you done to me? I'm burning from the inside. The other aliens ran toward him, but he threw them back with one swing of his arm. A burst of heat followed, knocking over chairs and melting part of the floor scrolls. Body was glowing now. His veins lit up like fire beneath his skin. The scientists shouted in panic. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Emergency containment, one shouted. He's mutating. Another screamed. This energy, this is not what we expected. Elias stood inside his cell, still calm. He didn't move. He didn't look afraid. He looked satisfied. You scam me, he said softly. You reached into something you don't understand. Skill was shaking. His armor began to crack. Molten lines spreading across it. His hands looked like they were burning from the inside, and yet he wasn't dying. He was changing. One scientist turned to Ellis, shouting to the glass, what did you do? Elias locked eyes with him. You tried to steal human strength, but strength isn't just in the body. He pointed to his head. It's in here. Then he pointed to his chest, and here outside. Skrell roared. His voice echoed through the ship like thunder. The scientists were terrified. Now they dragged Skrell into a quarantine chamber. The door sealed shut behind him. His glowing figure disappeared into the thick walls. Silence returned to the lab. Elias sat back down. No chains, no threats, no torture. They had tried everything, but the moment they reached into his core, they found something they weren't ready for, something too big to contain. A fire. A will, a human soul. The Xerox thought they were the masters of science, the rulers of the stars, but now they had touched something far more dangerous than any weapon. They had touched a human heart, and it was burning the burning truth. The walls of the quarantine chamber glowed. Orange thick metal doors separated High Commanders Krell from the rest of the lab, but they weren't enough. The heat inside the chamber was rising fast, too fast. Strange symbols on the walls were melting, bending like wax. The lights flickered. The ship's artificial gravity trembled outside the chamber. Chaos had taken over Zarnik. Scientists shouted orders at each other, struggling to control their equipment. They had built this ship to trap creatures from across the galaxy, but they had never faced this. Inside that chamber wasn't just a mutated alien inside. That chamber was something new, something human. Skrell wasn't screaming anymore. That was the part that scared them the most. He stood still, breathing slowly, his chest rising and falling like waves on fire. His skin shimmered, no longer silver, but cracked like lava rock. His veins pulsed with golden light. His eyes had changed shape round now. Human-like burning with something ancient emotion, he stared at his own reflection. In the chamber glass, not with fear, but with confusion. What am I becoming, he asked, his voice hoarse. No one answered. The scientists didn't know what to say. One of them turned toward Elias, still locked inside the observation cell. Human looked calm again, like a storm after the thunder has passed. You knew this would happen, the alien said to the translator. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the quarantine chamber. Then he stood up, walked slowly to the glass wall, and spoke. You wanted to study humans. He said you wanted to pull apart our bones, our blood, our memories. You thought strength was something you could measure in numbers. He paused and pointed towards SCR, but strength is more than tissue. It's pain, it's anger, it's a choice to keep going even when everything is lost. One younger scientist stepped forward. He absorbed it from you from the scan. Elias nodded. The scanner wasn't just reading energy, it was copying it. And when it copied me, it copied all of me. A deep silence followed, and the head scientist whispered something none of them wanted to hear. He's becoming human. The words felt like poison in the air. Becoming human. The Xerox had always seen humans as weak, primitive, too emotional. That's why they had invaded Earth. That's why they had turned cities into ash and taken survivors for testing. But now the same emotions they hated were tearing through their strongest commander and reshaping him from the inside out. In the chamber, Escrow dropped to his knees. His fingers dug into the floor. He screamed again, but this time not in pain and rage. Memories he had never lived began flashing through his mind. He saw fire, cities falling, a child hiding under rubble, a mother dying. In his arms, none of it had happened to him, but he felt it because it had happened to Ellis. The scan had gone too deep. It hadn't just pulled energy, it had pulled memory, trauma. Willpower. Scree was no longer just Zarn. He was becoming the first hybrid, a creature of two worlds. One of the scientists ran from the lab. Panic. We must destroy him now before it spreads. No, another shouted. If we kill him, we lose the data, we lose everything. But fear was growing. The scanner, now dark and smoking, sat silent in the middle of the lab. It had only touched one human. What would happen if it scanned more? Would all Zarnax burn from the inside? Would they all become something else? Elias watched the arguing, the fear, the chaos. He remembered Earth. He remembered how the Zarnax had hovered in the sky for days before the first strike, how people screamed, how cities crumbled, how soldiers fought until they had nothing left. He was one of the last to surrender. But even now, standing alone in a cage on an alien ship, Eyeless knew something. The Xerox and humans never truly surrender, because inside every human, no matter how broken, no matter how weak, there is a fire that never goes out. The Xerox thought they could control it, but they didn't know fire doesn't obey fire. Spreads. Elias leaned closer to the glass and spoke again, his voice soft but dangerous. Krell is just the beginning. The alien panicked. The air inside the Zarno flagship felt wrong, heavy, hot, uneasy. It was the kind of silence that only comes before something terrible, as stillness, where even machines seem afraid to breathe. In the heart of the lab, the scanner, once a proud invention, now sat dark and silent. Its smooth frame was cracked. Sparks hissed from its sides. Smoke still curled upward, like warning signs of the heavens around it. Chaos had taken root. Alien scientists rushed through the lab, their movements frantic and clumsy. These were beings who never panicked. Their minds were built for logic, not fear. But this was different. Commander Scroll, their strongest, their perfect warrior, was no longer fully Zarnic, and no one could understand what was happening to him in the sealed quarantine chamber. Skrell paced like a caged beast. His eyes glowed a dull orange. Now his breath fogged the reinforced glass. His skin had changed. Scales cracked apart, replaced by something more like flesh, something human. He kept hearing voices, but they weren't from outside. They were coming from inside his head. Voices that whispered of war, pain, of lost voices that weren't his memories, that didn't belong to him. He grabbed his head and growled, "No, get out of me. I am Zarn, I am." Not this, but the fire inside him didn't stop. It pulsed in his chest like a second heart. Outside the chamber, the lead scientist slammed his fist on the control panel. This is a contamination event. We must jettison the entire lab. Burn it from orbit. Another shouted back, and risk losing the only living human. Are you insane? Do you know what he could be worth? I know what he can do. The first one snapped. He just turned Scrum into a monster. Across the room, Elias sat in his clear glass cell, still untouched, still calm. He looked more like a visitor than a prisoner. Now the aliens whispered his name, the firebearer, not out of respect. Out of fear, a new scientist entered the lab, breathing fast. We have another Problem, everyone turned. What is it now? There are spikes in the ship's thermal. Readings the engines are overheating, but the reactor is stable. Then what's causing the heat? The young scientist hesitated, then said the one thing no Zarnik ever wanted to hear: the heat is spreading from him. They looked at Ellis. He didn't even move yet. Somehow the ship was getting hotter. The Xerox had studied humans. They knew the body temperature. They knew the biology, but no data had ever prepared them for this. This was not just a man. This was something else, something burning from the inside out in. The chamber Skrell let out another roar. His back arched. Heat waves burst from his body and cracked the walls of the room. Warning lights flared across the ship. Containment levels dropped. Emergency systems triggered, but the fire kept rising. He slammed his fist into the floor. The metal dented under his strength. Something deep inside him was changing, not just his body, his mind. He was starting to feel things no Zarnik had ever felt: guilt, shame, anger. He remembered how he had ordered Earth's bombardment, how he had called humans inferior. Now, that same fire he once mocked was turning him into something new, and it terrified him. Make it STO, he screamed. Gee, he had out of me, but no one could help him now, because what was inside him wasn't just energy, it was human willpower, and once that takes root, it doesn't leave. The lead scientist turned to Elias again. What do you want? He demanded. Elias finally stood. His voice was low, steady. I told you not to scam me, but you didn't listen. The lead scientist hissed. You've infected him. No. Elias said, you did that yourself. I warned you. He stepped forward until his hand touched the glass. It sizzled slightly, like it was warming under his skin. You think power comes from weapons, but real power, he said, tapping his chest, comes from pain, from survival, from knowing you were broken and standing up anyway. The glass beneath his hand began to fog, not from his breath, but from the rising heat in his body. One of the scientists shouted, shut down the cell's energy core. Now, too late. The lights in Elias's cell flickered. He didn't flinch. A pulse of golden energy burst from his palm, small like a heartbeat, but enough to crack the glass, just a hairline. But the room went silent. He stepped back and sat down again like nothing had happened. And the Zarks realized something terrifying. He's not trying to escape. He's waiting back in the chamber. Skrell fell to his knees. His voice had changed. Not in sound, but in meaning. It was no longer cold and sharp. It was heavy, almost human. What is happening to me? He whispered, not to the scientist, but to Eyeless. And across the room, without standing, Eyeless gave the answer. You're feeling the weight of what you've done. And then came the final blow. You're beginning to understand what it means to be us. The turning point for first time in his life. Skrell fell alone, not the kind of alone that comes from silence, not the kind that comes from being in a locked room. No, this was worse. He was alone inside himself. The voices, the memories, the emotions, they kept coming, each one sharper than the last. He saw flashes of Elias's past, of Earth's final hours, children running through burning streets, families crushed beneath, rebel soldiers screaming as their weapons failed, fires climbing into sky. And then he saw Elias standing over a broken barricade, bleeding alone, but still fighting, still defiant. Skrell had never understood humans before. He had studied them, fought them, killed them, but he had never felt them. Now those feelings were flooding into him like a tidal wave, and he couldn't breathe. He slammed his fist into the chamber wall. Crack again, cracked the armor around his arm, shattered, not from weakness, but from strength. His Zarnik body was breaking, but something inside him was rising, something human. In the control room above, panic was turning into something worse. Doubt. The lead scientist paced, clutching a tablet, becoming more unstable by the hour. His DNA is rewriting itself, combining human emotion with Zarno's strength. It's not evolution. It's a mutation. He's not a soldier anymore. One said he's a time bomb. Another scientist whispered what they were all thinking. If this spreads, we lose everything. But still some of them hesitated, because deep down a darker thought had taken root. What if this mutation could be controlled? What if they could use this power? Human energy was dangerous, but also limitless. Elias watched it all from his cell. He saw their faces. He knew those looks. He'd seen them on Earth in the early days of the invasion. Greed, curiosity, fear, pretending to be control. He stood slowly, walked to the glass again, and tapped it with his knuckles. The lead scientist flinched. You're still trying to use him, Elias said. Even now your kind is too dangerous to be left alone. The alien snapped, but too powerful to waste. Elias gave a dry smile. And that's your biggest mistake. He Leaned in close, you think power is something you can hold, but real power isn't held. It's carried through pain, through loss, through every moment. Someone wanted to give up, but didn't his voice lowered sharp as a blade that's. Why you'll never understand us. In the chamber, his Krell was changing, but not. Just his body, his thoughts, his heart. He sat against the wall, now head down, hands glowing faintly with fire, not uncontrolled like before, but focused. Calmer, like it was learning to breathe with him. He could still hear the human voices in his mind, but now they weren't. Screaming, they were speaking one memory, kept repeating a voice, Elias's voice. During the last stand on Earth, we don't win. Because we're stronger, we win. Because we never stop standing up over, and over. That sentence echoed in his skull, and slowly, painfully, Skrull began to understand. 3 hours later, alarms went off across the ship. Containment breach guards ran to the lower deck cells. Had opened doors that had never been touched were now unlocked one by one to human. Prisoners were disappearing. The lead scientist stared at the blinking screens. How they were secured, another shouted. The systems being overridden from inside the ship, but that's impossible unless. They all looked toward Elias. Still in his glass cell, still unmoving, still calm, except now the fog on the glass had vanished. The temperature around him had dropped. He was no longer burning. He was waiting. A guard stepped forward. We should eliminate him now, before this spreads. But just before the order was given to power and the lab died, total blackout. No lights, no sound. Then boom, a shock wave from deep inside the ship, then another and another. The ship shook violently. Emergency sirens howled. Red lights flashed. A message appeared on every screen system. Override scroll. 01 has taken control of engine. Deck. The scientist froze. What he's helping the prisoners. The chamber door slid open. Skrill stepped out, no longer limping, no longer screaming. He was walking tall. Now his skin was glowing gold. His arms burned like forged metal. His eyes were no longer Zarnik. They were human, but more than that, they were angry. Guards aimed their weapons. Skrill raised a hand. All the guns melted in place. I was your weapon, he said, his voice deep and raw. Now I am your mirror. Behind him, 2 freed humans followed silently. Elias smiled from his cell. He whispered just loud enough for the cameras to pick up. You turned him into a fire. Now he'll set your empire. A blaze of rebellion ignites. The halls of the Zarnik flagship were never built for noise. Everything had been designed to control. Quiet footsteps, silent doors, emotionless voices. But now the ship roared. Alarms echoed through steel corridors. Sparks flew from broken panels. Smoke twisted through the vents like coasts fleeing war. And in the center of it all stood the one the Zarniks never thought they'd lose. High Commander Skrull. Only now he was something different. His armor was gone, burned away. In its place, a living body forged from ash and flame. His chest glowed with orange cracks like magma. His eyes no longer matched the rest of his kind. They pulsed alive with emotion, with guilt, and with fury. Behind him marched a group of humans, barefoot, bruised, but alive. Each one had escaped their cell with scrolls. Helped, some feared him, some followed him, but all of them knew one thing. The tide had turned in the control room. Panic had become paralysis. Zarn officers stood frozen, watching as their systems failed one by one. He shut down life support too. Half the ship. One shouted, he's rerouting power to the lower decks. Another screen blinked. Attention, block Gamma empty. Then another armory breach. Detected access, granted a human DNA signature. And then the worst one of all. Prisoner 000, when Elias Ward, CEL, OPNED, the lead. Scientists fell back, whispering, This isn't a rebellion, it's a reckoning. Elias's Ward walked through the halls, now no longer behind glass. He wore no armor, carried no weapon, and yet every step he took seemed to shake. The ground guards didn't try to stop him. Those who did were left coughing in smoke, their weapons fried by heat. They couldn't explain. Elias didn't speak much. He didn't need to. He was a spark. The story the prisoners whispered through the walls. The reason Zarno guards had started locking their doors from the inside. He made his way to the ship's core where Eskel was waiting. The two faced each other for the first time. Both free. Lowered his head. I don't know who I am anymore, he said. Elias looked him in the eye. You what they feared the most. He said, a mind that questions, a heart that feels, a weapon that chooses not to be used. A pause, and Ilis added, You're becoming one of us. Skrell raised his head slowly. Then let me fight with you. And so the rebellion began in full, not with guns, not with ships, but with belief. Prisoners who had given up hope now fought with teeth and Fists they fought with broken tools, and stolen plasma rods they fought with pain. In their bones and flames in their hearts, because now they had something to believe, and they had Elias, they had Skrell, and more importantly they had each other. The Zarnic Empire had spent decades building fear they had erased. Species burned cities, crushed rebellions before they ever started, but humans were. Different. Humans didn't stop. When they were beaten, they rose, they remembered. They endured, and when they fought back, they didn't just want freedom, they wanted justice. In one section of the ship, a young human girl, barely 16, used her small hands to hotwire a door panel she had learned from watching the guards. In another, an old man with a crushed leg used his last breath to blow open a weapons locker. A former Earth soldier armed a group of teens with stolen Zarnic shockbite ends, and deep in the cargo bay a message was being recorded and bounced off the ship's emergency relay to any survivors out there. This is Elias Ward. We are alive, we are fighting, and we are not done yet. Inside the bridge, the Zarek captain watched the rebellion unfold. He turned to the last remaining scientist. I thought you said humans were weak. They were, the scientist whispered, but now they've changed us. The final moment apart. 5 comes with fire. Skrill stand beside Elias in the ship's core. He lifts his arms. Power surges through the conduits. Flames race along the walls like rivers of gold. The ship begins to shift, its engines no longer under Zarnic control. One scientist begs, "Why are you doing this? You were one of us." Skrill turns, his voice echoing with sorrow and rage. "No," he says, "I was never truly anything until I became human." The fire spreads. The Zarnic flagship was dying not from damage, but from defiant systems failed one after another. Life support flickered. Power grids shut down. The smooth hum of machines was now replaced by alarms, screams, and the low rumble of revolt. But the strangest thing wasn't the fire bursting from the lower decks. It was the laughter from humans, from prisoners, from beings who had once lived in silence, chained like animals in steel cages. Now they fought beside each other. They moved like a wave of living fire, spreading from corridor to corridor, cell to cell. The Zarnax had created this ship to be a fortress, but they had never planned for hope to get inside. Elias stood in the heart of it all, surrounded by the sound of war. His skin still glowed faintly, the last traces of his power burning beneath the surface. He walked slowly through the chaos, past fallen guards, broken scanners, and shattered screens. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate, because this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Behind him marched a growing army, human survivors, hybrid defectors, former slaves of other species, and at his side walked Shrell, once the pride of the Zarnic Empire, now their greatest threat. A group of prisoners burst into the bridge. The Zaruk officers there had already drawn their weapons, but it was no use. Skrell raised a hand. The room heated instantly. Panels melted, wires snapped, plasma rifles exploded in the guards' hands. Not one shot was fired, and the officers, they dropped to their knees, not in obedience. In fear, Skrell turned to Ellis. "What now?" Elias looked at the star map glowing in the center of the room. Dots lit up across the screen. Other Zarno ships, other prisoner fleets, colonies still under control. So many red dots, so many broken places, so many lives waiting to be freed. He pointed to the nearest fleet hub. "We go there." Skrell narrowed his eyes to fight. Elias shook his head. "To show them what you become." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Zarnic fleets received a message. "This is Elias Ward of Earth. You know who I am, and if you don't, you took our home. You tried to break us, but what you didn't understand, what you could never understand, is that humans don't die. Quietly we burn, and now that fire is coming for you." The signal broadcast on all channels. Every slave colony heard it. Every prisoner ship picked it up. Every silent rebel suddenly remember how to breathe. On the mining planet Dren 6, a chain worker looked up at the sky as the message played from a guard's communicator. He smiled, then broke his chains and lit the fuel tanks on fire on the dark prison moon of Villain's Reach, where humans had been forgotten for years. A young girl whispered Elias's name and led 20 escapes through a sewer tunnel. Firebombing control room from below. Across the stars, the legend of the burning human spread like a virus. They called him the Flame Bearer. Some called him a weapon, others called him hope, but all agreed on one thing: the Zarnic Empire had made a mistake. They hadn't just captured a human, they had copied him, and in doing so, they released something they could never put back in the cage back on the flagship Islas. Watch the stars from the bridge below him. The ship's remaining humans were organizing, fixing stolen ships, rewriting navigation codes, planting bombs in case the Xerox try to return. Skrell stepped forward, now fully transformed. His body still held a Xeric shape, but his face, his eyes, and the fire in his voice were all human now. I feel them, Skrell said. The others across the galaxy, they're waking up. Elias nodded. That's what fire does. It spreads, and then the impossible happened. One of the Zarno battle fleets turned around, not to retreat, to join a Zarn war. Captain had seen the transmission, and something deep inside him shifted. He sent a simple message: we were told to fear you, but now I see we should have learned from you. One ship, then two, then an entire squadron, not because they were forced, but because they finally understood humanity wasn't dangerous because of their weapons. They were dangerous because of their will. As the burning flagship turned toward the nearest colony, Elias looked out the window. The stars had never felt so close, and in the silence he whispered to himself, we are not the fire they fear, we are the match they lit by accident. The last words of the Xeric homeworld had never seen war, not here, not ever. It was the center of control of science, of law. Towering spires stretched into green skies, and enormous ships hovered like silent gods above the surface. The planet pulsed with power, arrogance, and order until today the fire had arrived. The burning flagship, once the Zarnek's pride, descended from orbit. Flames dancing across its broken hull, smoke trailed behind it like a black banner of rebellion. But this was not a suicide mission. This was a funeral for an empire. On the bridge, Ella stood beside Scroll. The stars were behind them, and beneath them the world of their enemy waited. But Elias didn't look at it with rage. He looked at it like a man looking at a grave. He spoke softly. This isn't about revenge, it's about truth. Skrell, glowing like a living furnace, nodded. Then let them hear it. The flagship speakers opened a broadcast cut across every channel on the planet, military, civilian, scientific. No one could block it, no one could silence it, and Elias's words, voice filled the skies too. The people of Zarno, I am not here to destroy you, I am here to show you what you became when you chose to destroy us. You saw emotion as weakness, you called pain a disease. You erased entire planets to protect your idea of order, but fire doesn't care about your order. Fire remembers. Across the capital city, Xerox looked up at the sky. They saw their strongest ship burning, and inside it, their former high commander, alive, changed. He stepped into view of the cameras, his golden eyes glowing, his cracked skin alive with ember-like energy. Skrell looked directly into the heart of the Empire and spoke his final truth. You made me in your image, cold, perfect, merciless. Then you let me touch a human soul, and now I finally understand what strength really is. At that moment, ships began arriving in orbit, but they weren't Zarnik warships. They were stolen freighters, broken prison transports, mining vessels, and from each one came the same message: we are the lost, forgotten, the ones you called weak, and we are still here. One by one, ships dropped out of hyperspace. Across the Zarnik system, humans, former slaves, defectors, even Zarn hybrids, those who had tasted Elias's flame and could never go back. The Empire had fought it, had won, but now the entire galaxy had come to see what they tried to erase. Inside the bridge, Skrill collapsed to one knee. His fire was burning out. Elias knelt beside him. Skrull's voice was faint now. His body, overworked and transformed, had reached its limit. I don't think I'll survive this, he whispered. You already did, Elias said, the moment you made a choice not to obey, but to feel Skrull's cracked hand reach for Elias. Their fingers touched Zarnik, and human, no war, no hate, just understanding. And then with a breath that carried both fire and peace, Krell spoke his final words. I thought your kind was weak, but now I see we feared you because none of you ever knelt. And with that he was gone. The fire within him rose like smoke from a torch and passed into the sky. The flagship's engines dimmed, but the fire did not die because it had already spread. Elias stepped forward, looked at the Xeric home world one last time. The city below was silent, no alarms, no weapons fired, just silence, not fear, recognition. The Empire had been shaken to its core, not by guns, not by bombs, but by something much harder to kill. Human will later aboard a smaller ship. Eyeless recorded one final message for the galaxy. They took our world, but not our fire. They scanned our bodies and found something there machines couldn't measure. They turned one of their own into one of us, and now they can never unsee what we are. We are pain, we are memory, we are hope, we are Human as a camera cut to black the stars continued to glow in somewhere in. The ashes of a fallen empire, a spark flickered, not to destroy but to begin.